Peter, just a brief note that we are now at 11:30, but we don't have any question for the moment. So if you want, I would suggest to continue if you want to show some specific points for 5 more minutes, and I think the time is sufficient.
Yeah, that is great. In fact, I was ready at this point with this presentation, but I would like to, of course, go on because we have the second tool.
In this case, I can suggest a couple of points that might be. You mean to move on to the logbook?
Yes.
Yes. So perhaps if you go back a little bit to the roadmap assistant, there's a couple of points that could be perhaps clarified further. I suggest if you go back to the final screen that you showed with the overall the summary, the detailed summary of the roadmap here. Yes. Okay, I think you mentioned already that the tool does not make calculations in itself because, of course, each country has its own calculation procedure, methodology, and, of course, default values and all the other specifications for calculation. And, of course, it's important that our approach is consistent with whatever is used in each country. This is, I think, an important point to note. So could you a little bit explain then what we see here as information, as a summary, including the labels, are what would come from the National Energy Calculation Tool if it was used in this particular point in time, let's say in 3 years' time, when this building will be, the work will have been done, and the situation would have reached, let's say, the third point here. If one made at that time the calculation, normally this is what we should get, correct?
Exactly. And maybe what we can see very good in this example is how the roadmap actually is individualized. So starting from today, you can say, okay, what are natural periods or points in time for the next step? So you can estimate, okay, step 1 might happen in 2020, but you can also say when pending maintenance measures are there, if you really have to go for the heating system because it's maybe very old, then you say, okay, this is when we do the first step. This is the trigger for the first step. Maybe for the second step, you don't even, you maybe cannot give a certain period like 2030 because the auditor doesn't know when the plaster needs renovation. When will this be? He only can say, this is the trigger. When the plaster needs renovation, then look out for a good external wall insulation, and then be aware of all the notes that he gave. And this is how this individual approach works. And maybe the roof insulation. Here the auditor gives a certain date, 2045, and for the roof insulation. And maybe this is a point in time where the owner says, okay, then I get paid my life insurance. This might be a good point, even though it's far in the future, but I already know that I will have some money left then, and the roof will be maybe like 60 years old then, and will have to be done anyway. So that's a good occasion, and this is how the whole approach works. So the auditor cannot make the plan without the owner. They need to issue this together. So, and on the other hand, the owner would not follow a plan that he doesn't like, that only the auditor made for him. So, of course, the owner will just follow a plan if it's his plan. And that's why it's so important that auditor and owner issue this plan together.
Very well.
Of course, this table, this detailed roadmap, might look a bit like a threat to some less technical interested owners, and that's why we also have this overview roadmap, which gives only the main information to say what has to be done, when will it be done, and what would it cost. So really the central information. And if the owner is not technically interested, it doesn't have to look at all these U values and frightening stuff.
Okay.
So he can have this roadmap in an online version. It would look like this. You can also have it in a printed version as a PDF or paper version. So yes, both is possible.
Mm-hmm. We have a specific question for a point you mentioned earlier about entering the maintenance cost of the boiler. If the net cost is after the 1,000 euro grant, I think you mentioned an example for this.
I think it's this point, the renovation cost. So an example would be you have a regular boiler and maybe it's 25 years old already, and it has to be replaced. You cannot rely on it anymore, and it has to be replaced. And of course, you could go for another normal boiler, or you could use a condensing boiler. And you see, the normal boiler would cost 7,000 euros. The condensing boiler costs 88,000 euros. So you can say, okay, of course, renovation cost is 8,000, and it's for energy saving, but you would have had to spend 7,000 anyway. So the difference, really, what you have to pay more for energy efficiency is just these 1,000 euros.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, or in this example, you get a specific incentive, which is maybe by accident exactly these 1,000 euros that you might need. I hope this answers the question.
I hope so, and indeed, it's important to state that the logic of the roadmap is that it's either to be used by what we see in Europe happening, which is step-by-step renovations taking place and financed by the homeowners themselves, or of course, when there are specific incentives, let's say, hopefully what will come from the renovation wave, for example, substantial incentives for renovations in Europe, that is also then factored in, and hopefully that will have a substantial impact in speeding up renovations. One final question before we move on to the logbook is, again, can you clarify whether the projected energy and costs are calculated by the tool or input by the auditor? And this is indeed what we mentioned, that for this, the national calculation tool is used, so it's provided by the auditor, and that's one reason, of course, why in all pilot testing we used certified auditors in the various countries who were trained to use the tool. So it's not something that can be used, let's say, automatically and provide all the information. Peter, anything you want to add to this?
Yes, maybe. Of course, all these energy labels have to be really in line with the national calculation norms and formulas. So this is very important, and that's why we don't calculate within this tool, because there might be differences to the national calculation, and we don't want this. So usually the energy auditor would issue an EPC, and then he has the calculation of the current building state already there, And I think in most countries it's like that, that he makes a copy of the current building state in his software and makes the changes of the first step, sees the result from that, enters them into the tool, makes another copy for the second step and issues the changes there and enters the results. And so he can calculate step by step with his tool, which he's familiar with, and just copy the data to the roadmap assistant.
Okay, great. I suggest we move on to the logbook, and I'm quite certain that there will be more questions that might come back even to the roadmap. No problem with that, of course. I think the logbook also will help in getting a broader image of the overall iBRoad approach. And of course, it's again important to note that we are talking about a modular approach, which means that depending on the needs of a national agency and authority, one might be used or the other or both, of course, and that all this is, of course, supported by the audit methodology as well.